This is such a great day today. We are going to talk about, we thought it was just tax until it wasn't. Welcome to this Let's Talk Trade, Becca. Nice to have you here. And I would like to as well do a shout out to all members. Thank you for joining us today. It is lovely to have you here. Today, we will be talking about a situation, one of the project cases we worked on in the past. And through the years, we've done many of these situations, but this one specifically was very interesting. It was a situation of a big multinational organization, actually a watch manufacturer, that wanted to transition from watch analog production to digital watches with like kind of smartwatch capability. Now, many companies are now in smartwatches these days. So that transition from analog to smart needs to be done in a smart way. So back in the day when this happened, what is important to look at, the customer wanted to ask about taking their product global. And because they were already very established, they knew about origin, valuation, tariffs, and all of these things for their normal product. But when they wanted to go to market, they were wanting to understand the implication of the country of origin, free trade agreements, and therefore tax. And what started as a pure, simple free trade agreement inquiry based on origin turned into a little bit of a more interesting discussion. It was tax until it wasn't.
Yeah.
Nice to have you here today, Becca, and I look forward to this discussion. What do you do when products are launched and it's not just about tax?
Yeah, I think you've summarized it well. The issue at hand, in particular, what can companies do when they are thinking going global, right, into launching their product into different jurisdictions. And as you stated it, what started seemingly was a simple question, right? How much do we need to pay on cross-border duties and taxes, via different tools like a free trade agreement and so on, quickly turned into something much larger and something more strategic because of, when we dug deeper, we've looked at that, even in terms of free trade agreements and so on, it was not a straightforward application for them because the product is substantially produced in one country, but it's simply, assembled in another country with packaging, labeling. That by itself was not a straightforward application of what they need to look into. So it brought other issues that we had to look into, starting from eligibility of preferential treatment all the way to, other cross-border customs related compliance issues, regulatory issues, and the usual tariff classification, valuation, and also documentation, right? So we had to go through all that to make sure that they're ready for their product launch. So exactly, the title is fitting, right? What we thought it was just a tax or border duty issue until it was not. So yeah, I think today we'll explore different critical elements regarding cross-border trade. I would say especially in relation to, origin when production spans borders, accessing other, issues such as preferential treatment, such as issues related to regulatory requirements, documentation requirements, customs compliance requirements, and all that in order to make sure that a specific client is ready for a successful global launch into various jurisdictions. So those are the things that we will look into today.
Awesome. So please, guys, as we are going to look at this discussion today, looking at taking a product live. So as we say, this specific customer was a watchmaker that was bringing out a new product, a smartwatch, into the market. So now they already do the distribution. They already do this worldwide, and now bringing out a new product line. How do you approach that? So we'll be looking at this, because what happened in this case is the client launched a product completely missing a piece of the puzzle, and thinking it's only about, oh, we can start shipping, because as long as we can benefit from the free trade agreements for our product, we can move forward. And what they missed was, oh, they don't even know if the product was regulatory approved. And once they got into it, they were like, oh, shucks, we are sitting back. We have so much more to do for this big launch. So I think it's important, given the network and given the people in the network, there's two sides of the coin, right? On the one side, what do you do if you're the manufacturer? On the other side, what do you do if you're the service provider? Because in essence, both parties have to work together. If you are the manufacturer that is manufacturing the goods, and you need to make sure that it's ready to go to market. On the other side, and obviously you want to then benefit of the free trade agreements. On the other side, if you're the service provider that wants to help the customer to distribute, it's always good to go through a little bit of a checklist to double check whether they are ready for this. So in essence, I'm going to run through a little bit of a checklist, because this was one of the things that when we started working with this customer, it became so quickly evident that they're not ready and where the problem was. So fine, we can answer the question of free trade agreements, we can answer the question of origin, but if you're not ready, you're not ready. Then origin and free trade agreements doesn't make any sense to answer, because you can't ship. So how do you know if a product, forget about necessarily this watch or anything, how do you know if a product is ready? So we have a little bit of a 9-step process. We call it the 9 pillars of precision. And so let's talk through it. So first one is people, making sure you have the right people in your corner, making sure your team knows what is going to be involved. And that people is basically 9 different departments in your company. So that's management. You need to bring in production, people that produces goods. You need to bring in sales, finance, legal, operations, customer support, systems, and trade compliance. So that's important. People, so it's the first pillar. Then you need your product. Your product needs to be, well, first and foremost, 100% correct, manufactured, and ready for market, so that it can be consumed, whether by business or consumer. Next pillar, so that's the second pillar, product. Third pillar, you need to bring in you need to understand the policies that you ship from or ship to, which is regulations and law. So where do you ship from? Where do you ship to? That is your policies that govern your product. And it will as well be the way you design your own internal policies in accordance with the law. Then that's the third pillar. Fourth pillar, we're looking at permits. That is the permits you need to get for your product based on the policy. The permit allows you to import and export your product into a specific market. This can also have to do with CE markings, declaration of conformity, certificate of conformity, TRAs, all of these things. Once you have that, then you're ready to issue paperwork. You need to issue your paperwork to go cross-border, that's pillar number 5, to make sure you can ship. This is your invoice, pack list, your certificate of origin, your certificate of conformity. And this was where this customer was very interested. Can I get this? So that you can benefit from the policy of the free trade agreement. Then we look at the 6th pillar, which is process. This is working with the process to put your product into a box, to ship it based on the policy, based on the permit and the paperwork, to get it out the door, right? But then you need to have the right what? Partners. So you need to have the performance matrix in place to measure the partner. So that's your legal contract, so that your performance is governed. Based on your performance matrix, if you don't have that in place, your partner will tell you how to do it. And that is most of the time being not necessarily 100% how you want it. So it's important to make sure what you want in your performance matrix so that you can find the right partner to meet that requirements. Then you find the right partner to help you to issue the performance based on the contract, and then execute the process based on the paperwork, including the permits, based on the policies, and to move your product cross-border. Who will then determine whether it's correct? Well, that's obviously the last pillar, the ninth pillar, the parties, which is the government authorities that will help you to move goods cross-border. And if they say it goes, that's ultimately getting it into the country, which makes all the people happy, which is the first pillar. So in essence, that's the cycle. So knowing where a customer gets stuck in the 9 pillars of precision is the key. And in this instance, the customer got stuck with what? Permits and policies. So they forgot that their product does not only need to comply with the free trade agreements with origin and things like that. They actually, if they want to go from a watch to a normal analog watch, a smartwatch, smartwatches have Bluetooth capability, Wi-Fi capability, connection capability. So now suddenly it starts to be regulated by the trade regulatory authorities, because now there's batteries involved, there's all of these other elements, there's Wi-Fi, there's connection capabilities, plug-in, electronics are involved. So now you get into a different arena of the law, different arena of the regulation, different arena of policy that applies to your product, which requires different permits. And therefore, you need to not only look at policy of free trade and tax, but actually policy of basically permits to get your product in. So I wanted to set this framework up for us, Becca, today, because I think if we look at that, I think that's where, in this instance, the customer got into a little bit of a challenge, as they were ready to move. They thought they had all pillars there because they did it before analog. So it was no problem really before.
Yeah. I think I also want maybe to delve into policy. I think you've highlighted all the 90s, including the permit. They need to go beyond, looking at, what is required regulatory in order to import those goods into the market. You've highlighted the new features of the smart watch that might attract different regulatory compliance related issue. But I think the other important issue, or when it comes to policy, is in this instance what governs the product right before they ship, which means the determination of origin also was not very clear at that moment in time, because the product is substantially produced or formed in one country, but the labeling, the packaging, and simple assembly is done in another territory. So if they wanted to launch it into these various jurisdictions, and if they wanted to use a free trade agreement to get a preferential treatment, does that really so the question is, where did it really produce, right? What's the true origin? Because answering that question will really give the client to look into, okay, which free trade agreement with which country? Is it with the country where it's really substantially produced, or is it where the assembly and some sort of packaging labeling happening? Which territory should they really use for looking into preferential treatment? And then after that, also they have to, once it's defined which is really the true origin of this smartwatch, the next step will be as looking into this free trade agreement themselves. What are the right provisions to look into in that will really might affect whether they actually will be eligible for preferential treatment or not, to pay a lower tariffs or zero tariff. One of the things that we, I think, highlighted to them is that a direct transport rule is very important, which means that you need to directly transport the product from the country of origin into where they wanted to export it to the destination country. If there is other ways of transporting happens, for example, if it is in a custom bonded warehouse, that can be allowed, but in many instances free trade agreements will not really make one product eligible for preferential treatment unless they meet that direct transport. So on this specific case, is it going to be transport directly from the country that substantially produced the product, or is it going to be from the country that assembled? Based on that determination itself, one can really argue that whether it's eligible to preferential treatment or not. And the other question we've asked after that, Dorothy, another policy issue is, what if it doesn't meet or fall within the free trade agreement, and no preferential treatment will be applicable because it's a very strict requirement. So how do they go about it is the next question. That's where tariff classification of each jurisdictions that they wanted to export comes in. What is the local tariff schedule and customs valuation issues and other customs related policies become important. So they have not also looked at the documentation part that I've said previously, in terms of looking at the certificate of origin and other the documentation that might be required in exporting into these countries, because some of them they might require legalization attestation for the documents, and others they might not. So they have to go through all those detailed points where I said documentation, the way you explained it, in our 9 piece of precision, it falls within the paperwork. So these are also other areas where they were not really well prepared, which we supported them to address those questions.
So let's because the network and the listeners may be more practically inclined, and some may already know things, but just to set a level playing field, maybe give us a bit of guidance. What is considered origin? Because the customer was all interested in tax. So could you link for origin, basically country of origin, free trade agreements, and the implication of what you call now preferential treatment and how it implies into tax, just to bring the down.
Yes. Yeah, I think that's a very important question, Dorothy. Yes, when it comes to determination of a country of origin, there are basically 2 main categories. The first one, what I've discussed and talked about, preferential treatment, that is directly related to free trade agreements, which means that if a country has a free trade agreement with another country, they will, if they meet the preferential treatment requirements, they will pay low tariff, or they will pay, in some instances, 0 tariff for some of the products. So what does that mean? How do you determine whether that product is indeed meets the preferential treatment requirement? In many instances, in many of the free trade agreements that we've looked at, there are 3 or 4 criteria. The first one is wholly obtained or produced. This one, in many cases, is for agriculture products and so on. And this is not agriculture product. This is a smart device that has a very, different way of looking at where is the origin determined. The other one is, where is it really substantially transformed, or where in simple term, where is it really substantially produced, this product, right? And another one where they check is also, does that transformation really change the HS code heading, which means does it make it to be considered a different product in a different heading? And the other one also they see on what they call it accumulation, which means that we're using what materials in other if it is, for example, a customs union and so on, if they are partner countries, do they use some of the production process in those countries? Does it really meet the accumulation percentage of it? So if it meets this provisions, it might be really eligible for preferential treatment, as I said earlier, also if there is a direct transport or not. But then a country cannot have, a free trade agreement or a bilateral agreement with the whole world, right? So that means that you might expect to go to what it's called a non-preferential origin determination. This is mainly focused for WTO member countries, where they provide the most favored nation tariff, which means this is a standard tariff for all members that the country will give regarding to a specific product. So you cannot discriminate. That means that if it is from this country, I'll give it this duty for the same product to another country. That's not possible. So you just give most favored nation tariff, a standard tariff to that specific product. So that's how countries or customs or trade compliance practitioners often determine how one can benefit from a free trade agreement or even from a non-free trade agreement, origin determination. So what do you need to look into? Just to conclude, where is it really substantially produced? That means that the majority of the product was produced in one country. But in a simple way, for example, if it is only packaging or labeling or a simple assemble, often does not be considered to be substantially produced. So that country where the packaging and the labeling happened cannot claim to be the origin of the country. So that's some of the practical things one needs to look into in determining the origin issue, because it would really impact the question they are asking about duties and taxes. How much do I need to pay into that specific country?
Awesome. So basically, it's really cool. When our daughter was really small, we we always say to her that she can only buy product that is made in countries close to us. So she had to go and turn every single toy around and learn to look at the made in, Germany or made in Switzerland before she was allowed to get it, because we said we're not going to pay to transport a toy across the whole planet to get it to her. So no, she can buy toys. So in essence, from a very young age, she learned what is made in, country. And that's basically what you're saying then is the, the origin, the country of origin, the country that it was substantially made in, where most of the value was added, and additional value add to the product, like labeling and stuff, doesn't change that origin. The made in a country is really the most important element that would then impact the preferential treatment. And then what I'm understanding is as well, from the next step is you're saying, okay, now, based on that origin, when it gets that stamp, you now get a world of agreements opening up for you to say, okay, you can either, if it's a W2 member, benefit from the standardization of the tariff, or if there's a bilateral agreement, you can benefit from a preferential treatment based on that origin and that a bilateral agreement. Now, question, the last thing,
free trade agreement.
Yes, we looked at the first pillar of origin, we looked at the second pillar of agreements, the third pillar of tax. What is normally the implications? How much is that duty and tax reduced based on these free trade agreements generally? Do we see something going to from 5 or 10 to 0, or do we see just a slight reduction generally into countries? In your experience, what have you seen?
I think when it comes to tariff, especially most developed countries, for many of the products, they've made the tariffs very low, right, already. And this product launch was really targeted to this developed market because of the type of the product itself. And yes, of course, one of the reasons why countries enter into free trade agreements, if you look at the purpose of it, and in many instances they put it in their preamble of the agreement, is that they wanted to make trade easier and to pay less tariff or almost no tariff if it's possible, and to have really an easy market access to that market. That's why they get into this free trade agreement. That's why you get more privileges if you are within that free trade agreement. That can be bilateral, or sometimes it can involve certain parts of a region. And in many instances, yes, it goes from lower tariff or zero. In this specific case, actually, we've looked at it. Those countries that there was a free trade agreement that was established and a preferential treatment is applicable, the client is going to pay almost zero tariff in many of those situations. And other countries where they didn't have a preferential treatment via the free trade agreement, they paid 5%, 7% to 10%. So that really impacts the how much they pay, but also on the product cost, right, when enters into that specific market. So yes, just to answer your question, indeed, free trade agreement, if it meets the preferential treatment requirement, it makes the product more competitive in that market because they tend to pay a lower tariff, or in many instances also zero tariff, depending on the product. In this case, yes, they are paying almost in all the cases zero tariff, but in other markets they are paying 5 to 10% of the tariff, or that is a border tariff. Yeah.
Awesome. So basically, it makes the competitiveness in the market very much better, and it basically makes your landed cost lower, so it gives you more margin, or it makes you more competitive in the consumer industry. So it's ultimately it gives you more game plan to play with, which is why I think the whole process, if we look at certificate of origin, that process of issuing that's your I understood at one point somebody told me that your certificate of origin is like the passport of the goods. It's like, so it's like when you travel with goods across border, you have a passport when you travel cross border, and that certificate of origin is the passport of the goods which they travel cross border. Based on that, you get special treatment or not special treatment. You basically have to stand in a long queue or the short queue. So with goods, so your certificate of origin gives you preferential treatment, more duties, more taxes, or less taxes based on the agreements between countries and the agreements that is the free trade agreements that is being implemented. So I think that is very useful to know then what policies is driven for a specific product that is based on a permit and the markings where it is origin created, so that you can get and implement that policy in your process based on your paperwork. Because your paperwork, without that certificate of origin, if you cannot prove it, you cannot get the preference. And getting the certificate of origin is based on rules of origin that you need to prove to the chamber where these goods are made, and you need to keep proof and evidence of your rules of origin that they have been applied. Otherwise, you won't get the certificate. So I think a lot of times when we look at the first pillar, the P's, a lot of times what happens is, if we look at, so management, you look at production, you look at finance, legal, operations, customer support, systems or IT and systems, and then trade compliance. The people that usually bring origin is obviously finance. They want to save money. Then they go and say, hey, give me the money, show me the money, Jerry Maguire. The problem is, go to operations and say, hey, I want to save the money. And operations say, well, we don't have the certificate of origin. So now operations have to figure out, so they go to trade compliance to say, hey, where's my certificate? And they say, well, we don't have this. We need to go and get the rules of origin approved. So you're in this loop between these departments where production, finance, operations, and trade compliance really need to work together to make sure that the product is not only ready for the market to be able to ship it, but ready to be able to get that taxes, saved.
Yeah.
And it's really a good collaboration between those different departments, because without proper understanding of how each one interacts with one another, the wheels of the bus may not go round and round. So you might just fall.
I think also maybe, Dorothy, when it comes to paperwork on documentation, especially we've raised the certificate of origin, I think it's important to highlight. It might seem to be very straightforward things, and many logistic companies and those who are involved in supply chain, they know this, but in some jurisdictions, it requires two layers, right? One is legalization and attestation. In some markets, it doesn't require those. Can you just elaborate and explain what is legalization might mean and attestation, and what are the processes that could go? Because in some instances, they might even need certain type of stamp, right, or ink, just to make sure that it is, legalized or attested in some markets. So can you just take us through that?
Absolutely. So in essence, that's usually what happens. Those four departments, finance would come and say, we want to save taxes and so forth. So then in many instances, you need to produce the certificate of origin. Sometimes the certificate of origin needs to be produced because it needs to be produced in order to get goods into the market. But it absolutely needs to be produced when you want to take benefit of the preferential origin and the duties and the tariff reduction. So now the question is, how do you get that? That's what you're asking right now. So what happens in this instance is people will go to a logistics service provider and say, what documents do I need? And then the logistics company would say, well, you need the certificate of origin. So they will push it back, and then it's like, okay, how do I get it? I appointed you to get my certificate of origin. So they slam back to the logistics service provider, and this battle starts going on between the two, where the logistics service provider says, well, we can work with the chamber, and we have these services in-house, and we can organize this for you. Great. So a lot of logistics service providers have this service in-house. A lot of them work with partners that can obtain that. However, it cannot be fully outsourced. I want to make that blank point, because the manufacturer remains responsible for its certificate. It is ultimately its goods. So it's a certification. It's a certificate of the origin of the goods. So you can yell at your service provider as much as you want, but it's not their responsibility, it's yours. So it is, if you're a manufacturer, you need to take care of your certificate of origin. Your service provider can execute it for you, but you're the one responsible for the rules of origin, the proof of origin, and the certificate of origin. Just putting it out there to take the hook off any of the service providers that's listening here. Then, second, there's these three different levels, actually. The first thing is basically attestation. Now, that is when you need to submit your certificate of origin to the Chamber of Commerce. What they do is they review that against the proof of origin that you normally submitted before as a manufacturer. So after a while, they don't check this in great detail. You submit it and they give you the certificate. The process for a certificate of origin is usually, it could take long. Back in the day, it was like 7 days. Nowadays, it's less than 24. It could be at like 2 hours. The processes for certificate of origins increased incredibly, and the technology is great these days. It should be backed by a database and proof of origin. What is that thing? So when you get the certificate of origin, it is usually attested by the Chamber of Commerce. So that means it's stamped by the Chamber of Commerce. Now, most in the past, this was an official like blue stamp on the documents. Nowadays, it's very much digital. So in essence, back in the day, it was stamped with a blue stamp. And in some countries, it was so bad that you had to make a water, you had to stamp it with blue ink, you had to make a water drop on it to prove that it was original, because the water would mix with the blue and make it smudge. So in essence, because they didn't trust that it was really real, so you had to, drop water on the blue stamp. These days, you have, because of the certificate of origin process, there's a code that is being printed on every certificate of origin that is a unique code that links the invoice to the certificate of origin, and that certificate of origin can be looked up in a database that is issued by the chamber. So in essence, nowadays, one find that code and that links to the certificate of origin. So that's now the latest little bit new attestation. Now, what is legalization? Legalization is the next level. That is when your invoice, your certificate of origin, and then is packaged and sent to an embassy to be legalized. That's a little bit of a red stamp on the documents, or it's very much a legalization imprint on the documents that's issued by the embassy itself. And what is starting to happen now, so one would have that and the certificate of origin, or non-attested, then you have attested, and then you have legalized. And what is new now, I believe, Becca, they issued now the apostille for some markets. And the apostille was a new process that came into force because it replaced the legalization need, and it combined actually the attestation and the legalization. So when you guys hear this, that's those two things basically combined. And it's to take the pressure off the embassies, that they don't need to do it again. So once it goes through the apostille process, legalization becomes not necessary anymore. And basically you have the two together. So in essence, I would have that provides the guidance, high level. However, we're still in a non-standardized world where we're trying to achieve harmonization globally. And if we really look at it, I think some markets still needs the original stamps, still needs the original elements, or think they need it. And I think that's the biggest crux of it, is that think they need it. So I think the onus lies on the service providers, the logistics and the importers in this instance, to understand how to defend their customers and explain to local authorities that no, your country has accepted the policy for this permits, and therefore I don't need this anymore. Show them the legislation, show them the articles where they've accepted the newer practices, and then say, you can continue accepting the old practices too, but your country has signed up for the new practices, so therefore here is the new practice. And that level of knowledge needs to translate to the local teams.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. Regarding the apostille process, it's been there for some time. It's referred also, or known as a Hague Convention, where members countries, as you've said it correctly, Dorothy, using that convention, abolish the legalization process. So if a given country, if they are a member into that convention, then there is that possibility of not going through the legalization process, which makes it easiest, step. So it can be only attested at the Chamber of Commerce, and the certification of origin document can be attained so that it can be submitted together with other paperworks and documents to process through the customs process. Yeah.
And I think if we then shift now gears into the until it wasn't a tax topic.
Yeah.
So in essence, I think what was really interesting in this instance is the customer came with all of these, origin, tax, free trade agreement questions, and basically provided the paperwork and all of these things which they were used to provide. But what was then at one point in the project very apparent was we said, okay, so where is your certificate of conformity? And they were a bit taken aback by the question, because we were like, well, you want to ship in digital smartwatches, so where's your certificate of conformity? Not just your certificate of origin. And they were like, what is that? We're like, well, it is to prove that you conform with the market, and that your product has gone through the regulatory procedures. Where's your CE markings? Where is your certificate of conformity? And it was only at that point that the customer realized their entire product launch cannot be launched, because they were so used to just the product being analog that it didn't have it. You needed maybe a battery, or, well, analog doesn't always need a battery if it's mechanical. But in essence, they had to suddenly deal with completely new regulatory things that weren't picked up by the people in the beginning on production, to make sure that they work together as a team. And this is where a product launch can go south really quickly if your people pillar didn't work together to really understand the policies of a market and how your product relates to that. So in essence, they had to rework things, because suddenly regulatory requirements for Bluetooth, Wi-Fi, telecommunications were applicable, and none of those elements really, which resulted in a quite big setback, but an immediate action that needs to be taken on product regulatory compliance to get certificates, not only of origin, but certificates of conformity, and to ensure product registration is done across the board for such a product launch.
Yeah.
And I
recall that well, yeah.
I think it's almost sad, but I think this is where it becomes so important to look at we're in a product launch, to not only look at it from a finance, legal, perspective, but really look at this is where every single person in a project launch team needs to put on that hat and work together, and not just think, oh, the product is manufactured, so let's get it sold, or the product is going to make money, what's the price, or yes, we have a legal entity, we can ship there. But is your product compliant with the market you want to ship it to?
Yeah.
That are you ready
Exactly.
to product?
Yeah.
And
I think also we all
at that point.
Sorry, can you repeat that question, Dorothy?
Yeah.
It just lagged a bit.
The biggest takeaway at that point?
Yeah, I think my biggest takeaway at that moment, when we started this webinar, we said the client's request seemingly to be asking a simple, straightforward question: how much do I need to pay duty or taxes on the border? If using a free trade agreement, preferential treatment, and so on. That was the question. That was the main question that they have. But if the more we dig deeper, we've realized that they were not well prepared for paperwork, for permit, for policies, for other important internal collaboration and working together, different departments, right? Trade compliance, finance, legal, all those things. But I think what is really important for me, what I took, was often what we do and help the client is they need to really well prepared, right? Pre-launch. What are the checklists that they need to have before they go into launching a specific product into a given market? Especially in this case, it was different jurisdictions, different legal requirements. Some are very developed countries and other are emerging markets. So the requirements are totally different. So it's really critical and important to work very closely this departments, what needs to be included in the pre-launching plan. They need to really determine the classification of the product, the HS code of the target market. They need to determine and map which free trade agreements might be applicable or they're eligible for preferential treatment if that's the case. And they need also to look into, as you mentioned, Dorothy, they need to do their market research properly. From a regulatory point of view, what certification do they need? Certificate of origin, certificate of conformity. Do they need a approval because the product has some features, right? Wi-Fi, batteries, and many other different features that might require a pre-approval. What is it, does it fall even under restricted goods or not? They just need to understand and determine that, and also which partners are they working with, right? Do they really, the partner that they pick locally, are they really well equipped? Do they understand the product itself and how to classify it locally if it is needed to be classified the local HS code? Sometimes it can go to 10 to 12 digits. So they just need to pick a partner that is reliable. I think that's another issue. But most importantly, they just need to conduct and think about what are once the goods are reached into the border, what are the questions that might be raised, what are the risks that they might face in terms of, valuation related issue, methods that they picked. And I think last time we talked about audits, right? And we talked about post-clearance audits and so on. But they also need to think now, even if it's the first product launch, they need to think about with their partner, how could they retain those documents and so on. So to conclude and to give you a summarized answer, launching a product into various jurisdictions and moving from what they are used to a new type of product that they're launching into a given market, one need to really work hard pre-launch on all those pieces that we've listed, the people internally, the product, what is it? They need to understand the feature and all that. They need to understand what permit is needed. This all are pre-launch, right? And also what paperwork is needed, what process is needed, what policies they need to have, and then what type of contract they need to have in order to make sure that their partners are performing well and according to what they've agreed, and get into the border. And then what are the things that they need to do once the goods are cleared. We've talked about retaining the documents and all that comes in. So it's not a step that one will take just slightly when you want to launch a product to various jurisdictions and markets, when those importing countries have different regulations and requirements. So it needs really a thorough preparation and a thorough way of looking at issues of cross-border compliance matters.
Absolutely. Oh, thank you so much, Becca, for joining today on this call and discussing, this project. I think it was a very interesting process we as well had to go through. I think for me it was massively sad to see the customer at the end of their launch realizing, oh my goodness, stop. You need to have done this already, and that it is not just about tax, it's about product, it's about product regulatory compliance. Oh, thanks so much. Let's read here. Absolutely. Thanks. Taju, for your feedback. I'm just reading this loud. That is, we need to build tax review into product governance at an early stage before launch. Absolutely, Taju. Yes, it is vital for that product and finance and operations and trade compliance teams to work together in the beginning and see things from each other's perspectives, to see the whole picture, because we all know only in part, right? But it's when we put things together that we see things fully. So absolutely. Maybe just want to open up the last 10 minutes of this call. If there's any questions that anybody wants to ask Becca, or wants to ask myself, or feel free to ask any questions. I think what we're seeing a lot more, exactly to your point there, Becca, is that elements pre-launch. I think what I feel is, as a customer grows into new markets, that element of sitting together, because we've helped so many companies, not only with their first product launch, but with their market expansion. And I think it's important to understand that, you know, the product team, or let's say that team, all the way from production, finance, legal, sales, operations, all of these guys need to sit together and think. They all have to put their hat on and then work together and determine how they will work together in each one of those 9 pillars, so that they can really bring their expertise to the table. And it's when a team becomes really cohesive in their approach that it makes the business more successful. It's when a team is scattered that they can't really serve the business and the company cannot grow. So looking at all of those elements is very important. So takeaway, tax risk isn't tax itself. It is the assumption that tax is someone else's problem. Oh man, philosopher too. Love it. Yes, no, absolutely. Do you have anything to say about that, Becca?
Yeah, I think it's exactly that. It goes back to people, right? Even within the same company that are trying to expand to a new market or trying to launch a new product, you know, in these various jurisdictions, they say that this is not my department, this is not my area, so, you know, deal with it. But it's not a simple thing, especially when one requires or wants to claim a preferential treatment, right? They need to, trade compliance department needs to get into it and define what is origin of a given country, and you cannot just assume. You have to do the work and determine, based on that free trade agreement, indeed it meets the requirement for it, so that they can claim zero tariff or reduced tariff and benefit or make their product more competitive. So yeah, the takeaway is not the hidden task risk itself, but assuming that, you know, other people or other departments, other parties will take care of that problem.
Yeah, I think I want to thank everybody for joining this call today. Maybe thank you, Becca, as well, for adding your feedback on this today. It has been really, really nice chatting with you. And I wanted to invite everybody to basically, we will have end of this month our first monthly members meetup, where we will be discussing just getting to greet one another, getting to get to know one another. We'll have this every month on the last Monday of the month, just to get to know and chat. The objective would be to every month feature one business of the network on the channel and see, just so that each one of you will have the opportunity to position your services out to the community. But it will be subject to the companies that comment and participate most on the network. So get commenting, make sure you like, and make sure you support the network, the collaboration. So comment, provide your feedback, give some guidance, and those members with businesses that you have a company, want to participate, want to be featured, will have the opportunity to be presented on our monthly members meetup. So we look forward to have you guys during our next Let's Talk Trade, and thank you for participating today.
Yeah, thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you so much, guys. Have a great day. See you soon. Bye.